Oh, yes, saying we're live. Brilliant. So, welcome to our next episode of 10 Minutes of Torah. Very exciting. My name is Daniel, and I'm super excited to be joined by the wonderful Anna Posner.
Hello.
Anna has been involved for LJY for years. She was a movement worker, was welfare officer on the most recent Kadima, and is currently in her final year as a student rabbi, which is super exciting because you're going to be ordained soon.
Yes, indeed.
Which is, it's been incredible to look forward to. So, could you tell us about this week's Parasha and the story behind it?
Yes, indeed. So we are still in Numbers, or Bamidbar. It is in Hebrew, and Bamidbar even means in the desert, because that's exactly what's going on. The Israelites are wandering the desert, and as Rabbi Aaron mentioned last week, there's kind of an establishment of power. And in Bamidbar, we keep on being reminded that Moses was kind of ordained or was given powers by God, and we keep on being reminded of that power structure. And this week is no different, because there's the story of Korach, and Korach is such a distinguished Israelite that he gets a mention. Not many of the Israelites get mentioned, but he gets a mention. He was born into the tribe of Levi, which is kind of like being born into royalty. And he looks at the power structure going on in the desert, and he says, wait a second, Moses is the only guy right now with all the power. He has this direct contact to God. Does he think really that he's holier than us? This is not okay. I'm from the tribe of Levi. I've got all this power, all this greatness. I should get some of that godly power as well, but not just me. Everybody should have equal godly power. And so what does he do? He gets a tribe of people together around him. Tribe's probably the wrong word. He gets a gang of people around him. And they go to Moses and they voice their complaints. They say, this is just not good enough. You think you're holier than thou, but actually we're all holy. What are you going to do about it? And do you know how Moses reacts? He falls on his face. And there's interpretations that maybe he falls on his face in prayer. Maybe he's so overcome by this insinuation that he's holding all the power. Maybe he's just sick and tired of all the complaining, because as you know from last week, there was a hell of a lot of complaining going on with the Israelites saying they were hungry, they could never build a land in the promised land. Maybe he's just tired. And so he falls on his face. Then he picks himself up and he gets angry. And he says, all right, you think you're so great. Let's see who God really chooses. And so he challenges Korach and Korach's people to a sacrifice off. He says, if we both bring sacrifices to God, and we'll see who God chooses. But they don't even get that far. They both start to bring the sacrifice, and before they can even begin it, Korach and his people, I say people, it might have been Korach and his men, get swallowed up into the ground and kind of disappear. And so Moses has gone through like these stages. First of all, he has this moment of, we don't know if it's shock, if it's despair, if it's prayer, we don't know what it is. Then we have this moment of anger and come on, what about you then? And then there seems to be some kind of remorse going on, because he's shocked by the fact that Korach and Korach's people disappear, and goes to God and begs God not to let this happen to anybody else. How does God respond? God doesn't respond by saying, okay, won't do anything. Instead, God makes all of the rest of Korach's followers ill. But ill in a way that they can get better. So I guess like what often happens when God wants to punish the people by killing them, and Moses says, no, God, come on, try something different. This is what happens again here. So that's the story of Korach. In a nutshell, we're in the desert and we're trying to establish power.
Gosh, it's a really dynamic, quite almost explosive story then. I mean, having people swallowed up and then being punished and made ill. Gosh, so what can our LJY members take away from this story? What's the main things that we can learn from it?
So when I was reading it and thinking about these dynamics of power and these uprisings, I couldn't help but think about two things that are really going on in the news right now, which I'm sure everyone's noticed. And of course, that's the Black Lives Matter movement and BAME community in the UK, and also the conversation around trans rights. And this month is both Pride Month, but also today it's something called Juneteenth in America. I don't know if you might have seen it on social media, but Juneteenth, 19th of June, celebrates the day in Texas that slavery was abolished. So in Texas, it's a public holiday. In the rest of America, it's kind of not an official holiday, but it's a holiday. And the reason that it's celebrated in Texas, I'm pretty sure, but please correct me if I'm wrong, is because Texas was the final state to get rid of slavery. Now, in the UK, we weren't much earlier. We did not abolish slavery until 1833. So that's only really about 30 years before America. So we've got that movement going on. And we've also got, like I say, it's Pride this month. And the Stonewall riots, or the Stonewall uprising, was really the first Pride protest. It was a protest because Stonewall got raided, and there was not equal rights for the LGBT community. And so the community were like, we need to do something about this. And they got up. They had a protest, a riot, an uprising, whatever you want to call it. That was in 1969. And the anniversary of that is next week. So June is a busy month for human rights. Now, what's this got to do with our story? So we're a bunch of Israelites wandering through the desert. These Israelites were released from slavery, but they weren't just freed the moment they were released from slavery. We've got all of this story of them wandering the desert. And last week, we discovered that they were going to have to wander the desert for 40 years to be able to get out of the mindset of slavery. It wasn't just good enough that they were freed. They had to get out of the mindset of slavery. Or we could say, which is better for our time right now, the societal structures had to change in order for, once the slaves have been released, then things need to change in order to create equality. So what's happening in our story right here? We've got questions of privilege. We've got questions of power. Korach, as we know, is incredibly privileged. He's an incredibly privileged human being. He comes from this kind of royal tribe. And he says, this isn't good enough. It's not only Moses that's holy, it's all of us that's holy. And so we see, well, you can see it two ways, right? You can see it either as Korach is this incredibly entitled royalist that thinks I deserve everything, or you can see that Korach notices his positioning in the tribe and uses his power, uses his privilege in order to try and create equality for everybody else. Does he do it alone? No, he brings those people with him. And then you see Moses's responses. First, Moses has kind of like a shocked response. Then he has an angry response, and then he kind of has a remorseful response. And I saw that a little bit in the place of allyship in both of these two movements, in the seeking of equal rights for the LGBTQ plus community. And right now, the real conversation is in the trans community. Not that all the rest of the work has been done, but I think with J.K. Rowling's statements and this quite nasty question of whether trans women are women or not, it's really brought to the forefront the fact that trans rights are still out there and need fighting for. And the same with the Black Lives Matter movement and the fact that the structural inequalities that mean that some people have to fight harder to get just as far in society. And I see Korach's place as kind of somebody with privilege using their privilege, and Moses's responses as quite natural responses of somebody being told that they're not quite doing right, but eventually getting to a place of remorse, and I will argue for our modern context, wanting to do some learning and wanting to change the structure of the society in order to move forward. And so what does that mean in the LJY context? I want to say that LJY, as I know it, is amazing at feedback. You guys don't fall on your faces if you hear that you're not quite doing something right, and actually you power forward and see, okay, how can we do this right? You've been having conversations about inclusion for years and years and years, and how do you create a most inclusive community within LJY? But also, a lot of LJY members are activists. And so how can you take those conversations that you have inside LJY, outside LJY? And we see that in the structure of the Israelites and Korach and Moses, that these fights for power, and of course in the modern day history and the conversations that are raising their heads again, this is something that we can always see. How do we use our privilege? How do we be allies? How do we notice when we would like other people to be allies? And when is it our time to step forward? And indeed, when is it our time to step back? So that is Korach in Bamidbar and Korach, what it means for us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much to think about from that, and the relevance as it has to all of these events and themes that we're looking at today is incredible. So thank you. Again, thank you everyone for joining. We'll be back at the same time next week with Rabbi Rebecca Burke from FPS. So until then, have a lovely week, and Shabbat Shalom for this evening. Thank you again, Anna.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.